and sky, earth and air, fire and shadow, memory and ice, boats on the sea, flowers coming up out of the ground. So we live in this world of earth and air, fire and water. And in this world we see patterns, and we call them stories. And we speak and sing these stories, and we live these stories, walking their pathways through the forest of what happens. I'm Jay Leeming, and this is the Crane Bag Podcast. We are exploring the Odyssey. We are telling the Odyssey. It has already begun. It began long before the wood was put on the fire by which we warm ourselves. It began long before we were born. It is around us like the stars in the sky. So, there's nothing for it but to begin, but to enter the stream of this story. Thank you for joining me. Let us begin. There is a mountain that cannot be climbed by humans, a mountain unreachable by us. And at the top of this mountain there is a great palace, made of gold and silver and of bronze and of stone and of the timbers of great trees. And in this palace the gods gather, the deathless ones who decide and dream and sing this world into life. And one day, in a circular throne room at the top of that palace, all the gods were gathered there in their golden thrones. And then Zeus, the son of Cronus, the father of all the gods, he stood and he said, "These humans bring all their troubles on themselves. We are not to blame for their fates. Look at Aegisthus. We warned him through an oracle not to court Clytemnestra, the wife of Agamemnon. Yet he did so, the two of them killing Agamemnon in the bath when he returned from the Trojan War. And years later, Orestes, the son of Agamemnon, he had his revenge. And Aegisthus too was killed in blood, and his soul went down to the house of the dead. We are not to blame for these crimes. We are not to blame for his fate." And look at little Ajax. Yes, Poseidon sent a great storm against him. Yes, he survived that storm, but then he had the arrogance to climb onto a cliff and denounce the gods. And Poseidon heard and shattered that cliff, and so he went down into the sea. So he's food for the crabs now. No, we are not to blame. Humans bring all their troubles upon themselves. And Athena, gray-eyed Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategy, she answered him, saying, "Father Zeus, son of Cronus, Zeus who loves the lightning, yes, it is true what you say. These humans bring many sorrows upon themselves. But there is one I think of now that has more than his share of trouble, and that is the son of Laertes of rocky Ithaca, that is, Odysseus. For even now he remains trapped on an island by the nymph Calypso. He has been there 7 years, weeping out his life, for every day he remembers his dear home of Ithaca, his wife Penelope, and his son Telemachus, and he goes to the shore of this island, and looks far out at sea, and weeps salt, salt tears into the blue water. And then Calypso calls to him, and he forgets everything. This must not be his fate. Did he not burn many offerings to you there on the Trojan plain? No, no, he must be returned home. We must send Odysseus home." "It is true what you say, my child," said Zeus. "It is true what you say. It is time for Odysseus to go home. Hermes," and he called Hermes to him, and he spoke and said, "Hermes, go to the island of Ogygia, where Calypso has her cavern. Speak to her there. Tell her she must release Odysseus. He must be allowed to go home to sunny Ithaca. Tell her this is the will of Zeus." And Hermes nodded, and he was gone. He became a shaft of golden light. He became a golden wind. He became a cormorant flying across the waves of the sea. And there, in the heart of that island, was Calypso, in her beautiful cavern, with skylights, with sunlight coming down through those skylights into her great cavern. And she was there at her loom, and she was weaving, and she was singing. And she sang as she wove, and she wove as she sang. And then she felt a bright glimmer in the air behind her, and she turned, and there was Hermes. a young man with golden sandals. Hermes, what brings you to my island at the center of the sea? Come, slayer of Argus, sit down here in this silver chair. Thank you, Hermes said. So he sat, and he said, Calypso, I bring word from Father Zeus, the son of Cronus. I bring word from him about the fate of Odysseus. He must be freed from your spell. He must be allowed to follow the dictates of his own heart. He must be allowed to go home. Ah, these Olympians, said Calypso. They do whatever they want. They follow their desires left and right, lusting after mortals, following them into the world. But what must I do? I am the one who saved Odysseus, you know. Odysseus, the favorite of Athena. Where was she when he was washed up on my beach, broken, a man almost destroyed by a storm sent by Poseidon? No, she was not there, but I nursed him back to health. I cared for him, and what do I get? I must simply follow these rules laid down by these Olympians high up in their castle in the sky. Well, tell Zeus I will follow these rules. I know where the power lies. I will do as he says. Very well, said Hermes. And now, said Calypso, please sit somewhere else, for Odysseus will be awake soon, and you're sitting in his favorite chair. Goodbye, Calypso, said Hermes, and he stood and simply was not there any more. And Calypso sighed, and then walked from her grotto towards the sea. The whispering, laughing, riotous, killer, merciless, beautiful sea. And there was Odysseus, standing in the waves, looking out far out at the horizon. And as he did so, he was remembering his dear wife Penelope and his son Telemachus and the rocky island of Ithaca that had always been his home. And he wept tears of sorrow that trickled down his cheeks and into the salt, salt sea. Calypso looked at him there. She savored the moment. She breathed in, she breathed out. And then she spoke. Odysseus, she said, I free you from the spell of my heart. I free you from the spell of this island. If you wish to go home, you may go home. Odysseus turned. He looked at her. What trick is this, goddess? What snare is this you were setting for me? You will not let me go home. This is a trap set by you, set by the gods. No, no, said Calypso. This is the truth. I will let you go. I swear it. I swear on the river Styx itself. I am letting you go home. And as she spoke those words, far down in the underworld, a ripple passed over the waters of the river Styx and then faded away. And Calypso looked at Odysseus, and she said, But you must know, there are many troubles that await you at home. If you truly could see all of these troubles, I think you would prefer to stay here. And what's more, well, your Penelope, she is a mortal woman. In these last 7 years here, you have not aged a day. Oh, my love, you have not aged a day here in these moments with me on this island. So consider carefully. If you stay here, you will live forever. You will be like a god. If you return to your Penelope, well, she will soon have wrinkles on her face, if she does not already. She will soon have gray in her hair, if she does not already. These things will happen to you as well. You too will wither and grow old. And one day, the two of you will be buried in the ground. People will say your names for a while, and then they will forget them, as all humans do forget. But here on my island I will remain, and you could remain with me, my love. You could stay here on this beautiful island, which is like a drop of golden rain that will never hit the ground. You could remain here, enjoying my charms, enjoying the music of this place with me forever. Odysseus looked at her, and he said, Ah, Calypso, it is true what you say. It is true. Nothing can compare with your beauty. Penelope is a mortal woman. Yes, we will grow old together. We will die together. Nothing can compare with life on your island, with the delicious fruits of this place. But I can say only that my heart tells me to go, and so I will go." And with that he walked out of the sea towards Calypso. And hand in hand they walked back to her cavern, and there they ate and drank together, as the sun rose higher in the sky. And when they had put aside desire for food and drink, Calypso went to a secret place in her cavern, and she found a bronze axe, and she brought it to Odysseus. "Here," she said, "go to the high fir trees of this island. They will be good timber for a raft." And Odysseus went to that place, to the whispering heights of that island, and there were the fir trees. Often in the last 7 years he had come there, wondering inside himself who he was, trying to remember his own life, who he was in that place. And he had gone to that grove of fir trees and looked up, and had been encouraged by their strength, their power, and their beauty, and how all these things were mingled in them as one thing. But today he took that axe, he hefted it in his hands, and he struck a mighty blow at one of those trees. Whack! And then another. Whack! Whack! He worked all day felling those trees. And then, some time later, with a mighty crash, the first of those trees fell to the forest floor. All day he worked felling those trees, stripping the branches and the bark from them, and dragging them to the shore. And that night he shared Calypso's table and her bed, and darkness covered the world, and the stars shone down upon the cavern of Calypso on the island of Ogygia. So he worked for 4 days to build a raft, and Calypso helped him. She brought him clay jars filled with barley, and cheese, and olive oil, and sparkling wine, provisions for his journey. She brought him cloth by which he could make a sail. She brought him rope and other supplies he would need for that raft. He labored long and hard, and after 4 days they had their last night together, a night of sparkling wine and moonlight on the water. But the next morning Odysseus was up early, before Calypso, and he went to the seashore as he always did, and he strode out into those waters, and he looked far off at the horizon. But today he did not weep. Today he felt the warmth of the sea around his ankles, and he looked far out, and he saw the winds moving across the waters, and he thought in his head, strategizing what would the weather be. He looked at the clouds, he looked at the currents, sniffing the salt taste of the air, making his plans. And then he turned and went to Calypso, and they shared a last meal together. And some time later they returned to that shore beside the raft, and he stood in the water, and she stood on the land. And in her hand she had a great and beautiful cloak. It was purple and green and gold. And she gave it to him and said, "Odysseus, I have made this for you. Cover yourself in it. It will shelter you through many storms." And he took the cloak and put it on, and he got into the raft. And he took an oar, and he pushed off from the shore, and the raft began to drift away. And he looked back at her, and he said, "Goodbye, Calypso." And she said, "Goodbye, Odysseus." And then he turned from her and looked out at the open sea, and the current began to take that raft and move it away out into the deeper waters. And the wind began to blow. And so he raised a sail on that raft, and soon it was filled with wind, and off he went. So he sailed for 17 days. And all through that time, he remembered all he'd been through. faces of those he'd known, some of whom were no longer. And he remembered the windy plains of Troy, and all he had endured there. And he looked up at the clouds, and he felt the currents around him and the wind blowing. And at night he looked up at the stars. But after 17 days, he was seen. The god Poseidon looked up from the depths of the water and saw him there. Poseidon, who was returning from visiting the Ethiopians. Poseidon, who was driving his chariot through the sea. In the blue depths, his 4 horses were galloping through the waters, and his chariot was being pulled behind it. And he looked up at the surface of the sea far above him, and there he saw the raft, and he saw the man on it, and he said, "There's that little man, Odysseus, the one who blinded my son Polyphemus. Well, clearly the gods have chosen to send him home. But that doesn't mean I can't give him a rough ride." And Poseidon clutched 6 thunderstorms in his right hand, and he hurled them up through the depths of the sea, and they went whistling through those currents, and broke out into the air, and went high up into the sky, and spread out in a great wall of black cloud across the sea. And the wind began to blow. Odysseus on his raft looked. He could see the wind changing the currents as the waves changed and became choppy towards him, a wall of wind coming closer, closer. He leapt for the sail. He just got the sail down in time, and then whack! A great wind hit that raft and cracked the mast into 2 pieces and pitched Odysseus down into the sea. With Calypso's cloak around him, he was dragged down into those bubbling waters. He fought his way this way and that. He came out into the open air, spitting out water. He clambered onto that raft again. Maybe he could make it. Maybe the raft would be in one piece. And he thought to himself, I should have died at Troy. I should have died in the great moil of the combat there, in the struggles there. I should have been cut down by a spear, defending all my friends. But here, to be squashed like a bug beneath the anger of this god? No, I should have died at Troy. And then a great wave came and lifted that raft up higher and higher and smacked it down on the surface of the sea. And the timbers and the spars went in all directions. And again he went down into the water. Again he fought with that cloak around him. Again he came back up, and he grabbed hold of half of the mast, one of the 2 broken pieces, and he clutched it as the wind shrieked and whistled around him. And then, out of the depths of the storm, there came a seagull. And this seagull came and landed on the end of the chunk of the mast he was holding on to, and reflected in the eye of this seagull there was a young woman. And with a blink of an eye, that seagull became that woman, and she spoke and said, "Odysseus, you're in some deep trouble now, are you not? Well, I am Ino, the goddess of this part of the sea. I have come here to help you. Yes, Poseidon is angry at you. You must shed the cloak you have from Calypso. You must give it up to the waters, and you must give up this silly raft. This raft is no good anymore. No, no, no. Here, take this scarf." And she threw him a green scarf from her waist. He caught it in one hand. "Tie that around yourself, and I say, swim across the open sea in this direction." And she pointed with her hand. "There you will find the island of Scheria. There the Phaeacians live. They will shelter you, for they shelter all travelers. And when you reach that island, do not forget to give this scarf back to the sea, for all who retain my gifts on land are killed." And he looked, and he saw a seagull reflected in the eyes of the young woman. And with a blink she became that seagull, and she began to wing her way across away into the storm and was gone. And Odysseus thought to himself, I will not give up this raft. This is all I have. I will not give up the cloak Calypso wove for me, beautiful Calypso on that island. And then a great wave came with a great wind behind it and smashed him down into the sea once more, and he lost his grip on that mast, and he went whirling down into the blue depths of the sea, weighed down by that cloak. And quickly he shouldered his way out of that cloak and took that scarf and wrapped it around his waist, and sputtering and gasping he came up into the air once again. As the winds shook this way and that, the spars of his raft could no longer be seen. And with that green scarf around his waist, he set out with powerful strokes, swimming through the ocean against the winds. And for 2 days he swam and was carried, swam and was bashed and battered across those waves, carried this way and that. Now and then he would glimpse far off between the breakers, a glimpse of land far off, and he would strike out in that direction. And at other times he would just rest on the sea, floating there on his back, thinking of his dear wife Penelope, thinking of Telemachus, and finally thinking only of the door sill of his house made of cypress wood, thinking of that place, clutching it in his mind to hang onto it as though by remembering it he could somehow bring himself there. And then, on the afternoon of the 2nd day, he saw he was close to land, but he looked. What's this? The land, the shore, it's covered in rocks, sharp rocks, all sizes. Oh, this is horrible. I'm going to be killed this way. So he drifted down further along the island, and then he saw a stream emptying itself into the ocean. And in his heart he prayed to that stream. O great king of the waters, river god, whoever you are, I pray to you. I make offering to you with my heart and my voice. Please shelter me. Help me to come ashore on this sweet island. And the river god heard, and lessened the force of its current, and Odysseus swam up that river towards the shore, and as the sun was going down, he crawled out onto the sand, and rolled over and collapsed on the sand. But with a last thought he untied that scarf, and tossed it back into the river, and the current took it far out to sea. And then Odysseus considered whether it was wiser to sleep there on the shore or in the nearby forest. The shore would be cold, the forest would give cover, though there might be animals there, beasts who could finish him off in his weakened state as he was. Finally he decided the forest was the better way. So crawling he left the sand and went into the forest. And as a farmer will take an ember from a fire and cover it in ash to keep it hot for the next day, so Odysseus covered his body in leaves and lay down in that forest, and he slept. And darkness covered the world, and the stars shone down. And he slept a long, hard, beautiful sleep there on the land at last. And then in the morning he was awoken by the laughter of young women. He opened his eyes. It was mid-morning already. He had slept a long time. And there on the beach he saw a wagon, 2 mules. He saw clothes, laundry laid out on the shore, drying in the sun. And there were 4 young women playing with a golden ball, tossing it this way and that, laughing and calling to one another. And then suddenly one of them threw the ball, the other missed it, and it landed in the river nearby where Odysseus was. And the eldest of the 4 young women came walking towards the river to get the golden ball. And Odysseus pondered quickly in his mind. Should he hide? Should he jump out? What should he say? What could he do? It was too late. She picked up the golden ball. Odysseus sat up. He took hold of a branch with leaves on it to cover his genitals. He stood up and he spoke and he said, "Dear woman, goddess, if that is what you are, yes, you must be a goddess. I look at you, I see your beauty and your strength. You remind me of Artemis, the goddess who guards all wild things. Yes, I see you. I remember those days in Troy. There was a moment in the battles there when I looked, and far off amid the carnage I saw a palm tree, beautiful, straight and tall, and a golden beam of sunlight hit the leaves of that tree. And in the moment I felt courage. I was heartened to see that, for I knew then that beauty existed in the world, and all was not lost. And so, seeing you now here, I am encouraged as well. For I am a shipwrecked sailor. My boat was lost at sea. I've been washed up on your shore. I am in need of help, of food, of shelter, of good water. Please, please, woman goddess, if that is what you are, help me." And startled, she listened, clutching that golden ball. But Athena put courage in her heart, and she said, "Have no fear, stranger, have no fear. I am Nausicaa, the daughter of Alcinous and Queen Arete. You have come to the island of the Phaeacians, and we are known for our kindness to strangers. So I will get you a towel and some clothes, and then we will go in this wagon up to the palace, and my parents will care for you there." "Thank you, dear woman," Odysseus said. And she turned and went back to the wagon, and she spoke to her friends, and she returned to Odysseus, bearing in her arms a towel and some clothes. And Odysseus took these from her, and then he bathed himself in the waters of the river, cleansing from him all the grime and the mud and the salt of the sea from his body. And then he dried himself and put on these clothes, and he went to the wagon where the young women were. And they welcomed him and put their laundry into the wagon, and he sat in the back, and they got in the wagon and spurred the mules on, and away they went, along the beach, up to a road, and they went down this road, up this road, this way, that, towards the center of the island. And they went along that road until they could see the town in the distance. And then Nausicaa spoke and said, "Stranger, I think the best course is this. I won't take you directly to the palace, but on the way there I will let you off. There's a little shrine to Athena there. I will let you off there, and then you can walk to the palace yourself. For I am indeed the princess of this kingdom, and you know how people talk." "Yes," said Odysseus, "that's an excellent idea." And as they approached the town, Athena spread a fog around them, so that no one saw Odysseus in that wagon. And Nausicaa drove the wagon to where the shrine of Athena was, and then Odysseus got down from the wagon. "Thank you, dear woman," he said. "Thank you for what you have done for me." And she said goodbye and sped that wagon off through the city streets. And Odysseus went to a statue of Athena that was there, and he knelt before it. And he said bright words of praise to the gray-eyed goddess. And as he did so, he heard a voice behind him. "Hey, mister, where are you going?" And he turned and looked, and there was a small girl there. "I'm going to the palace, dear girl. Do you know the way?" "Oh, yes," she said. She had an empty pitcher in one hand, a little girl, and she took his hand, and she led him away from that shrine and through the city streets. And they were streets crowded with animals and people, carpenters, pigs, goats, chickens here. There was an old man talking to a young boy. There was an old woman with some cards at a table. There was a carpenter selling this. There were glass bottles for sale there. Bread bakers going this way, that. Many things were happening. But still no one quite saw Odysseus as he was led by the little girl up through the streets of the town, closer and closer to the palace. And finally they got to the place, and they could see the great doors of that palace ahead of them, and 2 golden dogs on either side of those doors. And the little girl said, "This is the place. That's the palace. King Alcinous and Queen Arete, they are there, inside. They should even now be finishing their meal with the 12 other kings of this island. Goodbye." And she turned and went away. And though Odysseus did not see it, a moment later she became an osprey and flew away across the roofs of the houses of the town. And Odysseus walked towards the palace, and he saw the big golden gates of that palace, and beside, on either side of those doors, there was a statue of a golden dog. And as he approached, these golden dogs looked at him and blinked, and they sniffed him. And then they decided he was all right, and they put their snouts down on their paws, and they went to sleep. And Odysseus stepped through the golden doorway, still wrapped in a beautiful magical fog sent to him by Athena. He went right by the watchmen at the doors of this palace. He went right through the golden glittering halls, turquoise halls, green, beautiful things were there. He went this way and that. He came towards a large feasting hall, a round, circular room. And as the sun was going down, its last rays coming through the windows of this hall, he entered. And he saw in that beautiful room there were all the 13 kings and queens of that island. They had just finished dinner. They were raising their glasses in a toast to Hermes, praising him with the sparkling red wine, with the bright words in their voices. And they called out to Hermes and made offering to him, and they poured that wine into a bowl, and a servant took it away and poured it into the earth as an offering to the god. And then all the kings and queens sat on their thrones, and as they did so, Odysseus stepped forward. And the fog drifted away from his body, and he walked one step after the other towards the queen Arete. And he came to her, and he knelt down in front of her, and he reached out and clasped hold of her knees, and he spoke, saying, "O dear queen, please help me. I am a shipwrecked sailor, lost at sea for many days. All my companions were lost in a great storm. I have been washed ashore here. I come to you in need of everything, in need of water, of food, of shelter. Please, please help me." And she looked at him, and she saw the desperation in his eyes, and she also saw the cloak about his body, a cloak she had woven herself for her daughter Nausicaa. And then she spoke, and she said, "Have no fear, stranger. You may find shelter here. We will care for you here, for we are known for our kindness to strangers." And King Alcinous called to a servant, and a servant came and brought a table, and on it there was spread bread, and roast meat, and cheese, and sparkling wine, and the fruits of this earth. And Odysseus went to that table, and he sat, and he ate. And as he did so, all the other kings and queens in that hall went off to bed, leaving only King Alcinous and his queen Arete. And after Odysseus had put aside desire for food and drink, Queen Arete spoke and said, "And now, stranger, now that you have eaten, the heart inside me longs to know, who are you, and where are your people? How have you come to us on this island? Where did you get this fine cloak you wear on your body? How have you come to us here? What is your story?" And Odysseus said, "I was fighting in the Trojan War for many, many long years, and on the way home a great storm came and wrecked our boat on the sea. All my companions were lost. I alone was washed ashore on your island. There I slept the night. In the morning your daughter Nausicaa found me, for she had come to the edge of the sea to do laundry there in the cool waters of the river. She it was who gave me this cloak, no doubt a cloak woven by your own hands, a beautiful cloak. She gave it to me and took me in that wagon to your town, to this palace here. That is how I have come here. That is how I have come to be in this hall with you." "Ah, dear stranger, a sad, sad story," Alcinous said. "But my daughter, she should have taken you right here to the palace. She was remiss in her duties if she didn't do that." "Ah," said Odysseus, "well, she is as wise as she is beautiful. For she knew that being the princess, people would talk if they saw her with a strange man in her wagon. So she let me off at the shrine to Athena, and I found my way here. You have a wise daughter." "But truly now," said Odysseus, "I must sleep. The body is a hard master, and it is only a fool who denies its commands." "Yes," said Alcinous, "let's find you a bed in this palace." So a servant came and led Odysseus away down the hallways of that palace to a beautiful bedroom. And there was a lovely soft bed, and he lay down in that bed, and he slept. And darkness covered the world, and the stars shone down. And in the morning a rooster crowed, and Helios drove his crackling chariot across the sky. And a servant came and guided Odysseus back to the feasting hall. And there was a grand feast in progress there. There was roast meat, there was cheese and bread and sparkling wine, and all the 13 kings and queens of that island were there. And there was much happiness in that room, and there was also a bard. And this bard began to sing a loud and beautiful, powerful song, a song about the Greeks at Troy. He sang for all to hear the old beautiful story. Andramoi enipamusa palutropon hos malapola plankthe. Epi Troias hieran betoliethran apersen, pola de hogen ponto pathan algea hon katathuman. Arnuminos hente siken kai noston hetairan, alud hos eterus erusato hiemenos per, autangar speteresen atastaliesen olonto. Ton hamothen gethea, fugater dios, epe kai hemin. It was the 10th year of the war, and the Greeks had come there to besiege the city of Troy, but they were failing in that. In fact, they were the ones besieged, for they had failed to conquer the city and had been driven back by the Trojan army to their very boats there in the sand. The Greeks had been forced to build wooden barricades around their boats to protect them from the flaming arrows which the Trojan soldiers fired, hoping to burn down those boats and trap the Greeks there on the Trojan land. So the arrows were coming this way and that, but Odysseus had had the soldiers bring buckets of water. They threw them over the boats, dousing the flames as soon as they started. Still, the fighting was hard. They were hard pressed. Antilochus, the son of Nestor, ran to the barricade with a spear in his hand. He looked. There was a Trojan soldier about to fire a flaming arrow at the Greek ships. He threw his spear. It went whistling through the air. It hit the man straight in the chest, broke through the chest plate, went through his chest, came out the back, spinning. The man went down into the dust, gagging on his own blood. And then Memnon, the Ethiopian king, came forward, a spear in his hand, and he hurled it whistling through the air. It went right for Antilochus and hit him there in the left nipple. Antilochus, who was the son of Nestor, who had loved the flowers as a boy in sandy Pylos, had played by the stream, putting those flowers in his hair. The spear went in his chest on the left side, came out the back just above his liver. He spun down, he cried out, fell down into the dust, and the life left his body, his soul going down to the land of the dead. And Menelaus leapt forward and knelt beside him, feeling his chest, seeing the life go out of him, and he grabbed his spear and ran towards the barricade. And it was at this moment that Odysseus began to weep. Hearing the names of his friends, in the mouth of this bard, sorrow filled his heart, and the tears went trickling down his cheeks. He lifted his cloak up, hiding his face from the others. But Alcinous noticed this, and he spoke out to the bard, "Demodocus, my dear bard, please sing us a different song, for clearly this song brings sorrow to the heart of our guest here. Sing something else to gladden our times here in this feasting hall." And so the bard nodded and changed his song. And the feasting went on, all of them enjoying the good things that were there close at hand. And when they had all put aside desire for food and drink, King Alcinous stood, and he said, "Stranger, now the heart inside me longs to know who you are and where you have come from. Who are your people? Tell us the whole story. How did you come to be here on our dear island of Phaeacia?" And Odysseus heard these words, and took the cloak away from his face, and looked at everyone there gathered in that great hall, and then he began to speak. All right. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for exploring it with me. Where do you go in this story? Where do you find yourself? We begin with Odysseus weeping on a beach. Amazing, huh? I mean, we might think of these stories, or this particular story, as a warrior story, a fighting man's kind of a story. But it is more complex than that. And it's amazing how much this fellow weeps, how much sorrow is necessary in this story. How much sorrow are we going to put in? How much sorrow can you take? We see the great hero, Odysseus. There he is. He's helpless at the shore of the sea, weeping tears into it, unable to do anything to make his state better, to make his life better. It's an amazing sort of opening. After all this buildup of Odysseus, who's he going to be? Where is he at? What's he like? We got to find him. Then we get him weeping on the shore of the sea. Kind of amazing. And compared to the Iliad is a pretty yang story, if I can use that term from Chinese philosophy. This is a little more yin story, the Odysseus. There's more shadow, more darkness, more passivity, more sorrow in it. And the question is, when were you ever bereft? In relating to this story, when were you like that? When were you just completely lost, dependent upon the kindness of strangers? Yeah. I mean, for me, this is just coming at random, but when I was like 17, I think it was, going to England for the first time on a boat from Europe. And it was supposed to be a 3-hour ferry ride, but it was 8 hours, and because there was a hurricane and the seas were violent, and everybody, including me, was super seasick on this poor ferry after 8 hours getting across the channel. And we finally get to England. It's the middle of the night, and I've got no English money and nowhere to stay. And finally find a fellow at a little hotel place that is willing to hang on to my passport and give me a place to spend the night. And the next morning I will leave my passport with him, a dangerous thing to do, right? And go get some money changed and come back and pay him. So that's a small story in this world, it seems to me, compared to the many hardships people go through, the near-death experiences, the illness, the sickness. But anyway, it's what comes to my mind right now, perhaps because I was young and on my own completely for one of the first times. And I remember just being so grateful when this guy was finally like, all right, yeah, it's a bad state you're in, stranger, but I'll take your passport for a while. So that's a way in, is to think about the moments in your life when you were utterly dependent upon the kindness of others. For that is the situation we find Odysseus in here. I love also the and it's interesting in this story how many different women and goddesses Odysseus is in relation with. And what I mean by that is, in my own life, well, in anyone's life, right? You need experience in relationship. I mean, you kind of need to take up all these different positions in relationship. You need to know what it's like to be dumped by someone. You need to know what it's like to be infatuated with someone who doesn't care for you at all. There's all these different ways of relating to, of finding romantic relationship. And Odysseus, he experiences many of them in this story. And in this particular case, he's in the power of a woman stronger than him, who just likes having him there. And the Odyssey itself says he had no more desire for her any longer. Though he had once enjoyed her being with her, he no longer desired that after 7 years being on this island. So he is pretty lost. Later in our story, but previously in Odysseus's life, we will meet Circe, the magical lady of the beasts, who is quite more powerful than he is. And of course, we get also in this story Nausicaa, who is a younger woman there. So in my own life, before I was ready to settle into a long-term relationship, I had to experience all the different facets of this strange jewel known as romantic entanglement. And I feel like here in this story, Odysseus needs to do the same. And also, whereas the Iliad is a fairly male story, well, definitely, it's just a testosterone-heavy story, lots of fighting. In this one, again, his relations with women are key, and with the feminine in general, if I can use that phrase for the larger cosmos of things we connect that with femininity that seem to have a feminine nature about them. That's why we get this sorrow, we get this passivity on his side. And let's not get tangled up in gender too much here, but thinking of, again, Chinese philosophy, yang and yin, Yang is the sunny side of the hill. Bang, boom, out there. Yin is literally the shady side of a hill, the darkness. And so free yourself from gender if you wish. We don't need to think of those as male and female, but traditionally, generally speaking, those two sides have been equated with male and female. And in this story, Odysseus runs into monsters who were female. He runs into goddesses who were female, of course, Athena first among them. And that's his journey through this story. And we've just heard in the last couple episodes of this story, we've heard of Telemachus, who's a young man going out into the world, and he is helped by men, by Nestor, by Menelaus. Athena, who is a female goddess, of course, but she takes the shape of a man. So this young man, Telemachus, needs the help of men, whereas Odysseus, his father, returning home, is helped by women, like throughout his journeys, which is very interesting and fascinating to me. Also, this thing of clinging to the past, it's great. She gives him the cloak, Calypso does. And think about it, 7 years, I mean, maybe you've been in a relationship and you know what it's like, dear listener, to say goodbye. 7 years, and he gets on that boat and he sails away. And he's ready to go, it seems. He wants to go home. He's been weeping in the sea for, gosh sakes, for forever. And finally he gets to go home, but then the moment comes when this other goddess, again, there's just goddesses popping up all over the place, a goddess of this part of the sea, Ino, she says, look, buddy, you got to get rid of that cloak because it's only going to weigh you down, and get rid of this boat as well. But Odysseus, in a very soldierly, whatever, arrogant sort of way, is like, I'm not listening to her. I'm hanging on to this cloak from Calypso. He doesn't want to let go, right? And I'm hanging on to this boat I built with timbers from her island. And then a moment later, the storm convinces him otherwise. So when have we impeded our progress by hanging on to the past? I once had a dream. It was just crystal clear. I was in a boat, and there was something being dragged behind it, which was slowing us down. And everybody on the boat in the dream was telling me, you got to cut the rope. You got to cut the rope. And I've got this knife, which is this kind of a box cutter type thing I had. And I'm going back there, and it's a dead body that is being dragged behind the boat. And everyone said, you need to cut this, or we're going to just not go forward at all. I dreamed that dream at a time when I was in a relationship longer than I should have been. And it was time to end it, but I didn't have the courage to speak my heart at the time. And so I think of that with Calypso and with Odysseus. He clings to that cloak. We want to cling, we want to hang on, but we can't. And the motion of life, the stream of life wants movement, wants to move forward, wants to flow, not to stay still. So Odysseus learns that in a split second when the storm just collapses in on him again. He's going to die if he does not get rid of this cloak given to him by Calypso. And so he sheds it from his body. He takes on the scarf of this other goddess, Ino, who just happens to be there, and swims, takes her advice, and swims for shore. What's the lesson? Well, the lesson is listen to the goddess when she comes and talks to you. Take her words seriously. And it is amazing how many goddesses just show up. Divine beings are everywhere, wherever Odysseus goes. And one way to look at that is to say, well, he's special. He's the hero of this story. Of course, the divine is always there for him. And that may be true, but I think it's also, part of it also, is the ancient Greek vision of the world, which is that there are gods everywhere. The trees, the rivers, the forests, the skies. The gods are around you. The world is swimming. It's abuzz with gods and goddesses everywhere you go. You're in the forest. You're in the realm of Artemis, who protects wild things. You're up on the heights of a mountain. You're in the realm of Apollo, who works from afar. You go down to the sea. You're in the realm of Poseidon. And every little river, every little stream has its nymph, its little spirit inside it. It's quite amazing. So I think it's partly because he's the hero. I think it's also just their worldview. The earth is alive with these divine presences everywhere you go. And then he gets to the shore, washed up on the shore. I mean, this soldier, right? This king, this arrogant man, really, at the beginning of our story, when we get to the beginning of his story, has now become this naked man, almost dead, washed up on a beach. It's quite a transformation, and it's interesting that we begin the story there with him at the lowest point. He pleads over and over in this part of the story. Pleads with Nausicaa, pleads with Arete, the queen there. Help me, please. He is in a place of utter need. And he is welcomed. Welcome, stranger. Those key, beautiful words of this story. It's called xenia in ancient Greek. It's called guest friendship, a pact between you and whoever comes to your door, whatever wanderer comes. And Zeus looks over the traveler, guards the traveler, and is the guardian of xenia, of guest friendship. This is a theme throughout this story and in ancient Greek life, so it would seem. The suitors violate xenia. They are not invited, but they stay. Well, they come, and Penelope is duty-bound to welcome them under the rules of xenia, the agreements of that culture, but they abuse this and just stay forever and eat everything in sight and use up the wealth of the house. Later, we'll meet the Cyclops. Xenia will be broken there by Odysseus, of course. And here we get, again, Xenia in its good sense as well. I should mention also Telemachus is a good example of this, because the suitors break the rules. But Telemachus, when a stranger comes to the door, he welcomes him and gives this person food and then asks about their story. The underlying assumption beneath Xenia, it seems to me, is that life is hard, the world is cruel. You could die at sea, you could die on land, sickness, attack, thieves, bad things are out there. And so if someone has made a journey, you don't ask them questions. Just give them some food and water and be grateful that they made it to your door in one piece. That seems to me behind the idea of Xenia. And Telemachus, as I said, he welcomes this stranger who comes to the door, who turns out to be Athena, a beautiful thing. And here, later in the story, Odysseus shows up naked without anything on the island of the Phaeacians, and he is welcomed. First by Nausicaa, and then by Alcinous and Arete. And they don't ask him their questions until he is eaten, and they care for him in the best way. And they are an island known for their kindness to strangers, so it's the perfect place for him to come, honestly. If you're going to be washed up on a shore, well, this is the shore to be washed up on. There are many strangers. We are strange to each other these days, perhaps more than ever, because of our isolation, due to our phones, due to the internet. We are isolated from each other, and so others seem strange to us, whether they are from Syria and they're refugees, whether they live across the street and they think differently from you about political questions, whether they are a different quote-unquote race than you. We are surrounded in some ways. We feel ourselves to be surrounded by strangers, and so welcome stranger, that kindness, that acceptance of another seems very key to me and very relevant right now. We need some of that alive in the world. For the world is filled with refugees, traveling borders, washed up on shores, just like Odysseus here. How many have fled Syria? How many have fled wars in the Congo? How many have fled Afghanistan? They are traveling in the world, and may they be welcomed, as Odysseus is welcomed here, as we would wish for ourselves to be welcomed were we in such a state. And then finally, I would just say I love the waters of memory in this part of the story. 17 days he's on that raft with its timbers there that came from Calypso. It's a little pause, a gap in the story, which is quite beautiful. No one's being attacked. No one, there's no battles that he's fighting. He's just drifting on the sea, sailing on the sea alone on his raft. And when is he most himself? When are we most ourselves? When we are home in the company of friends, when we are in community, or when we are alone? There's a boyish part of me that says, it's when you're alone, when you're fighting that battle, when you're, striding through the jungle, you are most yourself. You don't have to put on a face for anyone, I suppose. That's something that we have, right? We're supposed to look a certain way. People are judging us when you're off striding through the forest, when you're exploring the jungle, when you're on your own out there on the sea. Perhaps you were most yourself, most free to be yourself because you were most natural. That's something I have felt, certainly. And certainly as a teenager, and certainly now, I crave to get away sometimes from the view of society, from being a person seen and cataloged and described by others when they see me on the street or wherever. So in some sense, I feel most myself when I'm away from all others. But at the same time, the danger here in the Odyssey is you become no one, as Odysseus will become no one later in our story. Who are you when you're not connected to a land, to a place, to other people? Odysseus is journeying back and hoping to be remembered on Ithaca as the son of Laertes that he is. Odysseus, sacker of cities. Odysseus, who the clever-minded Odysseus, who helped win the Trojan War. But here we see him as no one at all, just another body on the beach. And perhaps we are only truly ourselves when we are in community, when we are connected to others, to family, to friends. You know how it is at a job. You might have a certain self at that job, and then you go home and you're in a family, perhaps, and you have a certain self in that family. Which of those is true? Well, it's a meaningless question. And I don't think there's a real answer to this either, between the forest and the city, between adventuring out in the world, climbing the mountain, I've climbed mountains. I'm lucky enough to say that, right? Climbing Mount Hoffman in Yosemite, a beautiful mountain to climb, alone, getting to the top. There's something elemental. And again, if I wanted to throw gender in here, and how can I not? How can we not, living in the world that we are? That's generally a male form of identity, perhaps. I'm the one who went to the South Pole. I'm the one who climbed that mountain. That's who I am. Whereas generally, a feminine way of identity is I am the one of this family. I am the one of this town, of this place, connected to this place. We can't forget Penelope in this story. And like you, perhaps, or I won't speak for you, especially because you aren't here, but I want there to be more of a story for her. I want to know more about her. But Homer, whoever he or she is, doesn't say a lot about her. I want to know her adventures, and I want her to have those adventures. But this is the story of Odysseus, not of her. And she is the one who stays home. She is the one who tends the fire, who cares for that place. And that is a truth. As much as I want her to live a fulfilling life, and who's to say whether it's fulfilling or not for her, but that is a role as well. I'm a father now, a parent, and I see that as my daughter goes off to summer camp, as she goes off to play with her friends, and I'm the one at home doing the dishes, making the bread. And I'm not trying to talk in stereotypes here. I'm just saying what I'm actually doing, which is the dishes and the bread. So Penelope, she stays home. And as much as Odysseus's adventures might be exaggerated and larger than life, especially as we go on in this story, monsters and huge storms and all kinds of things, perhaps her life at home is exaggerated as well. Home all the time, staying there, weaving that loom, caring for Telemachus. These things are both necessary, it seems to me, the adventuring and the staying home. And they are both ways of defining ourselves, and perhaps we need both of them. All of us do, regardless of gender, regardless of who, where, what we are. We need that time on the mountain. We need that time deeply connected to others, to know who we are. Two mirrors, and we look in them both. Two rivers, and we swim in both, and perhaps they join together and then flow towards the sea. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Thanks as well to the many Patreon supporters out there who help to make this possible. If you're able to join them, please do. I'm pleading like Odysseus on the beach. Please do. Well, it just keeps this thing going. It puts fuel in the car. It feeds apples to the horse of this podcast, which wants to run and fly and gallop through the forests of this world. You can go to my website, jayleeming.com, JAYLEEMING.com, and there are links there to my Patreon page. And there's also more stories. Yeah, just stories of all kinds hanging out there. Thank you for listening to this. May it find a home in your heart. May you find this story in the world in a nourishing way for you and for others. Take care, and all the best.